Okay. Welcome all. I'm Liz Dartnell, the Executive Director of the Sexual Violence Research Initiative, and on behalf of the SVRI, Kirsten Muth, the CEO of the Joint Learning Initiative on Faith and Local Communities, Prabhu Deepan from Tear Fund, who with the hard work and support from both Prabhu and Veena O'Sullivan, hosted the first iteration of the Hub at Tear Fund, and without whom, of course, we would not be here today. And to members of the Hub's current leadership, I am so delighted to warmly welcome you to this webinar on faith, GBV research, and the launch of the newest iteration of the SVRI JLI GBV Hub. We have such a super event planned today, but before I do discuss the agenda in a little bit more detail, I just want to mention a few housekeeping matters. As you know, we're holding the meeting on Zoom, and I'm sure all of us in the room are now more than familiar with Zoom. But if you can, and if your bandwidth allows, we would ask you to keep your video on throughout the webinar to create a sense of connection so we can see you. And if you want to talk, you just wave your hand. But we will be using the chat for questions and answers. So please use that chat function liberally. We'll be watching that and responding to issues raised and questions throughout the hour-and-a-half event that we have planned for you today. We've also created a Padlet for the meeting. So please, for those of you who haven't already done so, introduce yourself. Morma's going to cut and paste the Padlet link into the chat now, and you're welcome to go and introduce yourself on the Padlet or in the chat as well. Both are perfectly acceptable options. The meeting has been, as you've just been informed, is being recorded. So now to what are we going to do today together over the next half an hour and an hour and a half. We're going to be talking all things research and faith and GBV. We have an incredibly fabulous panel of speakers for you. First, I'd like to introduce you to Kirsten Larson-Muth. Kirsten, as I said, is the Joint Learning Initiative of Faith and Local Communities Chief Executive Officer. Kirsten's going to tell you more about the JLI, the Joint Learning Initiative, and we'll also talk about the revisioning of the GBV Hub and why we're all here today. Following Kirsten is Dr. Elizabeth LaRue, who affectionately is known to all of us in the room and many more people as Lisa. Lisa is Research Director of the Unit for Religion and Development Research at Stellenbosch University in South Africa. Lisa's going to share with us the growth and the impact of faith research on violence against women. And building on both Lisa's and Kirsten's presentations, we're then going to break you up into groups to discuss the role of the Hub and how can the Hub support you in your work and your research moving forward, and how can we start thinking around research priorities for the Hub. If we have time, we'll take a short break. It might just be a standing up from your chair and sort of spinning around a little bit or having a stretch. After the break, Prabhu Deepan, the head of Tear Fund's Global Thematic Support Team based in Colombia, Sri Lanka, will share research on transforming masculinities in the DRC. I know Prabhu is with us in the room, but has also warned us that a cyclone's on its way. So we will see how it goes, Prabhu, and we'll make a plan should we lose connection to you. It is indeed a wonderful, fabulous panel, and I can't thank you all enough for being part of today's discussion, and thank you all of you who have joined in today online. I'd also like to take the opportunity to quickly thank the SVRI team, Liesl and Morma and Angelica for participating in the event, and for Morma and Liesl for producing this webinar. Now, enough from me. Kirsten, I'm going to hand over to you to talk about the Hub.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I'm delighted to see you all here, and it's a good event that we have planned. I want to thank the SVRI team, and especially Liesl and Morma for their work on preparing this meeting. This really is the launch of something new for JLI. The Joint Learning Initiative, some of you may or may not know, was established about 8 years ago as an effort to advance the work on evidence and research of the role of faith and religious actors in humanitarian development and community well-being. Over those 8 years, we've produced quite a body of work, and I joined the JLI in June with a mandate to sort of look at the organization and where we're going from here. And I walked into an initiative that was already underway, led by Prabhu, the hub chairs at the time, Prabhu and Liz, and um, who had already begun to advance this initiative, which I was very excited to find because it very much resonated with some of my own thinking about how, now that we've developed a body of work that does have quite a well-established track record of making the case for religious and faith engagement, we remain challenged by a continued secular bias to the role of religion and faith. And so as we look at the hubs, we really wanted to look at how we can advance and speak into that space. And this hub in particular gives us an opportunity to mainstream some of the work that we're doing on faith and GBV with a wider research community, with a global span and a very diverse set of opportunities. So I was fortunate to walk into this opportunity and strongly and immediately endorsed it. So for us, the hubs have traditionally been our member-led. We have several hubs right now, and we have several retired hubs, and they are member-led initiatives where they identify a particular, they usually start with a scoping study, and then go on to identify some specific questions that they want to study and address and do some work around documentation. And then that documentation and that work is shared across shared learning platforms, which are the hubs. And so the key, I think the key heart of the Joint Learning Initiative is in our name, really a peer-to-peer space where academics and practitioners have an opportunity to work together, learn together, and advance the field and move the needle on understanding the role of faith and religion in humanitarian and development work. So in terms of this specific hub, when we look at the continual remaining bias against religion and faith, gender is very much at the top of the list. So this particular hub presents an excellent opportunity to mainstream some of the work that we're doing to advance the work of our members in interfacing with a wider world of research and evidence building, to participate in some of these global platforms. And then what I would also emphasize is a key opportunity here is the investment of the SVRI in advancing research led by LMICs. So we're which is also very much, as I've joined the JLI, we've begun a process of looking at how we can move beyond our global hubs into more regional expressions of these hubs, to increase opportunities for multiple languages, for more practice-based knowledge, for all of the efforts that really reinforce the second part of our name, which is the local communities. And so I think that the SVRI, well, I would not classify it as a regional hub per se, because SVRI is a global entity, but their investment in that particular aspect of the work is very much resonant with what we're trying to do now. So I don't want to spend a whole lot of time. My hope for this particular meeting is and we're lucky that this coincided with a paper by Dr. LaRue, which she'll be sharing with us, is to sort of look at where we are where we are right now with faith and GBV, looking at some of the gaps, some of the opportunities that have been identified in Lisa's paper and in previous work, including a paper that was presented at PARD in 2019. And we'll be discussing where that leaves us in terms of what this hub might want to do and what you all in particular might want to see happening in this hub. The hub, as it goes forward, will be led by a leadership council. We have an interim council for the moment, but we have put out a call for applications to the leadership council. I've asked that link be put in the chat. Once we form that leadership council, that will be the guiding body for the strategy and the approach of the hub. This particular meeting is to help guide us in some initial directions for that, and to encourage you or people that you might recommend to submit some applications for the leadership council, which will be a combined sort of team of people serving a 2-year term of both practitioners and academics. So if you have a chance to look at that, please do apply or suggest some names that you might think would be appropriate for that. So I am delighted that we have this moment to introduce this as a new version of a JLI hub. I do see going forward that we want to look at different iterations of hubs. And this is a perfect example that really responds to an opportunity that this particular field faces. I also want to acknowledge the leadership and the input of Tier Fund over these past years in leading the hub, along with Liz, and some of the pivotal kind of groundbreaking work that Tier Fund has done in this field. And I'm very happy that Prabhu will be presenting the latest of a great body of work on this issue. So without further ado, I will stop. And once again, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Kirsten. And that was perfectly to time. Aren't we good? So I'm now going to hand over to Lisa, who I think has been well introduced and probably doesn't need additional introduction. So Lisa, over to you to tell us about the state of the field and where we should be heading, or giving us some guidance on that. Thanks, Lisa.
So no pressure, but thank you for the opportunity. People, I'm sharing a brief overview on the growth and the impact of research and intervention around faith and violence against women and girls. So it will inevitably be accompanied by my thoughts and my interpretations of these developments, but I hope it will nevertheless be a fair introduction for those of you who are not well versed on the developments in this area of research and praxis. I'm not going to be referencing certain pieces of research. I'm kind of trying to sketch broad trends and how we see things developing. Wilma, if you can go to the next slide, please. Now, I think, first of all, it's important to remember that faith was not always welcome at the development table. So riding the wave of the secularization thesis, international development was convinced that the role and importance of religion was fading, death of religion. And for many of those in the development community, this was a good thing. And it was connected to this idea that theological superstition and sacred practices cannot go together with a developed society and community. Now, this has changed. And I think it was a natural process of just time passing and seeing the role of religion continuing, but also with the lobbying of key actors in key spaces within the development sector. The 21st century, I think, compared to the last part of the 20th century, there's really unprecedented recognition for faith actors and their role in development. Next slide, please, Wilma. Now, I'm going to continue with this table metaphor, and you're going to be very sick of it by the end of this, but I'm sticking to it. Now, Sustainable Development Goal 5 recognizes violence against women and girls as a significant development issue. Now, if we're saying that religion is at the development table, I think if we think about a VOG specific development table, I don't think religion is seated as comfortably at the table. So it's sitting on that purple chair, the purple plastic chair in the front with no back support, and it's a bit uncomfortable and it's drafty. So it's at the table, not that comfortable, but I think we're also seeing this changing. And the work of this hub has been instrumental in changing, in achieving that change. Now, for decades, there has been research around religion and Vogue in a purely academic sense. So it was especially framed within theological studies and especially by feminist theologians. But this was often not engaging with praxis or ways to address or end violence against women and girls. It was more of a theoretical engagement framed around religious texts and how they should be interpreted. So arguing theologically for gender equality and non-violence. So it did not used to have much reach outside of academia and specific disciplines, but we are seeing this change. And like if I give examples, there's like the Circle of Concerned African Women Theologians have really brought a change in terms of how academics are engaging with praxis. And we're also seeing academics going into practitioner spacing and anchoring their empirical work within Vogue faith-based Vogue interventions. And I'm thinking here, for example, it's just one example of many of the Ujamaa Centre at UKZ in South Africa. Next slide, please, Norma. Now, I think especially the last 5 years have brought considerable shifts in how the role of religion is being recognized and included in Vogue interventions and research. Now, because of time, I'm only going to give a few short examples, but I hope this illustrates it to you. We're increasingly seeing secular development spaces recognizing and including this focus on religion and Vogue. So, for example, the DFID funded What Works program funded and evaluated only 15 approaches to ending Vogue. And one of those projects focused explicitly and exclusively on religion and religious groups. So the inclusion of that TFN project in the DRC has really greatly increased the legitimacy within the broader Vogue field, how engaging with religion to address Vogue is being seen. Now, Tier Funds and Islamic Relief and World Vision and many other faith-based development organizations have been doing and funding faith-based Vogue interventions for a long time. But we also see agencies like the UN Trust Fund to End Violence Against Women, they are also funding a host of interventions that, that focus on faith communities and target faith communities and faith leaders. So this is a significant area of interest for this agency. So then we also see development ministries of various countries funding faith-based Vogue interventions and research. So I'm thinking of DFID, CEDA, GIZ, just to give examples. But then we also see organizations like Promundo and Songe Gender Justice that are increasingly designing interventions or components of their existing interventions that engage with religion or religious leaders or religious programming communities. So these are organizations that are decidedly non-religious, but they've realized in doing their practitioner work that they need to engage with religion and religious leaders and institutions in some kind of way in order to be able to address Vogue. Now, so in various ways, in these examples, we see how institutions and even I think broader systems have joined the religion chair at the table or are legitimating that seat in some way. And we also see that shift at the SVRI forum that happens every 2 years. Now, in 2015, it was a very big deal for us to have a faith panel at the forum. And then in 2017 and around, we were so excited that we had 2 faith panels. But by 2019, we had faith panels, but we had a number of papers that used data from faith-based interventions, but they were being used in other panels, for example, on financial management. So there was a mainstreaming of the faith-based Vogue interventions where the learning from the interventions and the research is now increasingly being seen as widely applicable and legitimate. And that legitimacy has been an issue, I would say, even 5 years ago. Next slide, please, Norma. There. Now, we see the shift at SVRI also mirrored in research and academic publications. Now, religion and Vogue is no longer only of interest to a few specialist journals, so a wide array of journals. So in public health, international development, gender studies, feminism, sociology, they're regularly publishing research on religion and Vogue. We still see, though, that the majority is only on Christianity and Islam, which is problematic for various reasons, but this is still a big shift. And then the next slide, please. I'm still within my time. I will finish in time, Liz, don't stress. Now, I'm not going to go into any detail on how COVID is impacting religion and Vogue interventions and research, because I believe we're still too much in the thick of things to really see how it is impacting the broader trends that I've outlined to you. And research always plays catch up. Now, JLI has been a key actor in sourcing and collating the learnings on COVID and religion in general. So I invite you to go and take a look at their website and all their resources. And SVRI has also been instrumental in collating and sharing learning around COVID and Vogue research and practice. Just one thought that I'm sharing, and this is my reflections. COVID is upsetting the traditional format of doing intervention work and research. And it's not easy, and it's sometimes impossible for outsiders to come into a setting, come into a country and implement interventional research. So COVID is possibly creating the circumstances where localization of aid and research can actually happen, because it has to happen. So I think we need to think about the potential there. And then the last slide, please, Norma. Summarize. So what we've seen is a shift. At the start, religion had to be exceptionalized in order for it to be recognized as a role player. So this was true of faith and international development generally, but also within the VORG space specifically. So this was our phase of faith advocacy to actually get a seat at the table. I do believe we've moved beyond this now. I think to continuously exceptionalize religion is not an effective long-term strategy, especially not if we're selling it as a magic bullet. It needs to be seen and explained as part of an integrated, holistic prevention and response. And in terms of research, this is my last point, I think where we want to go is that VORG and faith research becomes less of only an exclusive focus and more that it becomes a potential component of any VORG research. So part of getting it to this point is that we're demystifying religion and creating tools and indicators and validated scales so that any VORG researcher feels equipped and enabled to include this dimension in their VORG research. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm looking forward to our discussion.
Thank you so much, Lisa, for really taking us on a journey, highlighting the history, highlighting where we're coming from. And I really did love the imagery of the table and the uncomfortable purple chair. But I did love the color, by the way. So if we're making that chair more comfortable and embracing, can we keep the color? What I'd like to do is, we're not a large group, and I wonder if I could open it up to folk could just jump in and ask a question. So Morma, I wonder if we could just close the slides for now and so we can see people. And if you want to just turn on your videos, and we could have just a short discussion before we have a break to ask, or before we go into groups, to ask Lisa's questions. And particularly, Lisa, maybe I can start around the issue around exceptionalizing and not as a strategy. Is there some way that we might be able to have multiple strategies? Because I think we all recognize how valuable religion is as a part of a toolbox for prevention and response. But maybe in different contexts, there might be different ways that we would use those strategies, both maybe as exceptional or integrated, and maybe talk a little bit about your experiences of different models as we move forward. But I feel like we are at a really important space and time. And I'm so glad that SVRI is part of this journey. So that's my question. Are there any other questions that anybody want to raise their hand, or just jump in? I think it's a small group. It'd be great to have a conversation.
Can I ask a question?
Please.
Sybil here from Sweden. Thank you for the presentation. Lisa, I think it was the last presentation. I have a question for you. I'm interested in the evidence we have around the effectiveness of the interventions that are out there, working with faith leaders, and sort of some sort of a comparative analysis of that. I've sort of been looking into that a little bit. It seems like there's a large grey literature that you described a little bit, and then there's this sort of separate academic peer-reviewed literature, but I see quite a big disconnect between the two. Is that just sort of because I'm not deep enough into the reading, or what is your assessment of the actual evidence base of effectiveness that we have? Sorry, my voice is breaking. Bit of a cold.
No problem. Lisa, do you want to answer those, or unless there's any other questions at this stage? Did that inspire any thoughts?
I can go. Or do you want us to add another question?
No, go.
Okay, so Liz, I'm going to respond to Sybil's first because it's fresh in my mind, and then I'll come back to you. So I think many of the people in this room has been responsible actually for for contributing to the evidence base. So there is academic literature around Vulg and religion with a very much around the effectiveness and the impact of working with religious actors on Vulg prevention. It used to be that the majority of the academic literature is qualitative, but now in the last 3 years, we really see more and more quantitative studies, RCTs coming out. And the reason why there's been that lack is simply because faith-based practitioners usually just don't have as much money, and RCTs are expensive. So they can do the qual work, but they can't do the quant work. But there's been a push, and that is really now coming up. And what probably we'll be talking about some of that quant evidence, but there is qual evidence out there as well. And that has been very practitioner centered, really engaging with what practitioners are doing and finding what is working, what's not working. But the gray literature space is still the biggest space, because I think it's always that way with an emerging field. Those that are doing it are recording it as much as they can, but they just don't have time for the academic system. But feel free to drop me an email and I can send you some stuff, because I can easily put my hands on it. Liz, quick response to your question, and I think there's a longer discussion there, maybe for our breakout rooms. It's never wrong, I think, to exceptionalize faith, and I change my positioning totally depending on the space where I'm at. So if I'm engaging with only faith-based actors, I would be, and in terms of their strategic approach to Vulg prevention, it would be a very brutal discussion around, okay, but what's not working, and how do we work with others, and how are we lacking? Whereas if I'm engaging in UN spaces or more policy-orientated spaces, there is more of an exceptionalizing, contributing, that kind of angle. So it's not a never appropriate anymore. It's not a either or. I think it's just to always be honest, always be. There's a good and a bad. Don't sell it as God's gift to mankind, because it's not that simple.
Lisa, I think we are almost coming to the end of this part of the webinar, but I really want to thank you, because I think both Kirsten and Lisa have really set the scene for the group discussions. And Sybil, I wanted to come back to your question, just the violence against women field, as well as having the same struggle around the importance of bringing the grey literature and practice-based knowledge and learning into academic discourse. And how do we do that effectively? How do we work with journals and academics and practitioners to frame their work in a way that is should be published, who does the reviewing, against what criteria, because it's incredibly valuable and it's part of the continuum of knowledge. And we have to move away from what Lisa was talking about, sort of like this hierarchy of which is more important than others, because each piece of knowledge is valuable in its own way. And so as a field, and bringing the faith field into the violence against women field, because we're having the same discussions, is really important that we start working ways of bringing the important learnings, and I know Prabal will talk more about this after the break, into academic discourses or different spaces with policymakers, etc., in ways that will be helpful. So on that great note, we are now going to have a small group discussion. So yeah, thanks for the question. Small group discussions. We're going to break probably up into about 2 or 3 groups, Lisa. I don't know what you've decided, to sort of answer some questions. And what we're going to use is the Jamboard. I don't know if anybody's used a Jamboard before, but if you haven't, it's not that complicated, but when we first started using Jamboards, we're always quite bad at it. We ended up on the wrong Jamboard and we were writing on other people's Jamboards. A Jamboard is a virtual whiteboard where you can use Post-it notes and you can share ideas and have a discussion online with Post-it notes, and it's quite fun. The Jamboard has been put up online, the link. So what we're going to ask you to do is to press the link in the chat or cut and paste it into Google, and that will take you to the Jamboard. We're going to put you into, and I don't think we need 5 groups, Liesl, because we're not that very big. So I think we're going to put you into 3 groups, and there will be 3 questions on the Jamboards that you you will find yourself in. And on the Jamboard at the top, there will be an arrow that will say 1, 2, or 3, and you just click to 1, 2, or 3. And each Jamboard is labeled group 1, 2, or 3. So Liesl and Mom are going to invite you to either group 1, group 2, or group 3. So all you need to remember is which group you've been invited to, and then go to that Jamboard. But it doesn't matter if you get lost and you go to the wrong Jamboard, because we don't mind. This is just an interactive discussion to think about what are the sort of key research priorities for the field. What can the hub do to help you to further your research, advance your thinking around what we should be doing as a field? How do we bring players together, and those sorts of questions? But they're all listed, and there will be a facilitator in each of the groups who have some understanding of Jamboard. So if we all get lost, we'll get lost together. So on that happy note, Liesel's going to move us into groups. See you in a group. You just need to press the button. You did. You have 10 more minutes for feedback. so,
Oh, well.
Okay, we've got 3 groups, and group 1, group 2, group 3. Who would like to feedback on their post-it notes? I think that Morma will share the post-it note, what do we call them? Jamboards with everyone. And if maybe does any group want to start, or should we just start in group numerical order with group 1 going first? Group 1's still moving around bits, I see.
I think we have it together.
Hey?
I think I was moving it around just to make it make sense, but we can go, I mean, we didn't get to point 3, but we could do the first couple if that's fine.
Perfect.
Okay. Beginning with the first question, what would you see as a priority activities, including research priorities for the hub over the next 12 months? We actually spent the most time speaking about that. One idea was to, being responsive to the moment in time that many organizations and entities are trying to respond as it relates to equity, and thinking about our work, our research, and supporting scholars and practitioners as it relates to equity within the violence against women and girls space, and countering some of the issues would be a good place to start this year as well. Again, basically responding to equity. Promoting research on Indigenous and spiritual practices. Looking at research around the intersection of social norms and faith and gender. Exploring the importance of talking to communities and men in addition and beyond religious leaders. Oftentimes when researchers are, collecting data, they're, especially on this topic, they're speaking to the religious leadership, which in most religious traditions are men, or they're speaking, to the women, if they're speaking to the women at all. And so the idea is to speak to also the men who are the laymen who are impacted as well. Looking at the role of women as religious leaders in their communities around the social norms as it relates to changing social norms and gender-based violence. Also, while we're looking at research and working with practitioners in the space of violence against women and girls, specifically, looking at the girls. Oftentimes, we're still focusing on the women, or when we're talking about girls in many contexts of development, it's like focused on STEM, but really focusing on how the girls are impacted by some of the social and cultural norms as it relates to religious traditions and local contexts. Prioritizing local research institutions, and then also looking at the role of women religious leaders, and again, the influencing men in the religious communities and beyond religious leaders. The last one before prioritizing local research institutions also ties to what we were discussing within question 2. How can the hub best support you or your work, such as webinars, etc.? Providing grants for local research, not just local research as far as evaluation, but also participatory research, where there's an intervention and an evaluation of that action along some of those issues that were discussed in point 1. It was brought up that JLI has been looking at that, and so that was brought up in this as well. And then also in the Africa region, promote and provide communication platforms for research in the Francophone and Lusophone countries, and encourage scholarship. I guess this is actually tied to point 1, that shows the positive role of religion and spiritual practices on development, asking what do we learn from religion is as important as asking what can faith-based groups learn from us. And then I guess group 1 was still working on it, because 1 just popped up again, promote research on inclusive genders and sexuality, exploration into non-gender conforming, fluid, LGBT sexuality, spiritualities as well. So yeah, again, we're talking about equity, and we're talking about, you know, the space that we're in globally, and then, yeah, exploring these across the globe, as well as exploring this and rights within local context as well.
Wow, Harriet, thank you so much. And group 1, round of applause. Yoo-hoo! That was fantastic. And I see lots of sort of real resonance between the work of the SVRI overall and a lot of the themes that are coming out in these discussions. So, which is a bit of a relief, actually. If it was always going a completely different direction, it would be quite hard to manage. But it sounds, we really want to be working on decolonizing knowledge. We really want to be working at supporting researchers researching in their own communities, their own issues, led by researchers from lower middle income countries. We really want the imagining of data to be done in lower middle income countries, and not by, you know, the data being taken and high income countries do the imagining, the framing and the theoretical discussions. That has to be happening here. So thank you for that. And it was a great summary. I'm going to hand over to Raphael, who's going to present on behalf of group 2. So over to you, Raphael. Thank you, Harriet. That was great.
Hi, hello. Well, I'll try my best, but if there's anything missing, please, guys, step up, girls, guys. For our first question, what would you see as a priority, activities, including research priorities for the hub over the next year? Well, the first was already mentioned actually in the beginning of this meeting, which is to set up a new diverse leadership council, which I also believe it's important, because then it's also materializing how this is going to be led by. Then creating a knowledge hub. We talked about often having different sources and different works scattered all over, and maybe if you could just create maybe at some sort of like a, I don't know, shared platform, all this knowledge. And on top of that, not only create these hubs, but also transfer this knowledge to local partners and faith communities. And we thought about different ways of doing it, either through, I don't know, fact sheets, videos, articles, some other things. I will talk about it more in the second and third question. But also find a way to also curate the evidence that's being produced. And to do so, maybe we can create spaces where we can help each other to curate this evidence, and assess the diversity of work being done. So maybe creating micro spaces where these diverse voices and diverse work can be shared intergroup and intragroup. What I mean with that, and what we meant with that, I guess, is that so there's some work doing regionally somewhere else in, I don't know, in the Congo, or some work doing in the KZN, some work with LGBTIQ being done here. So how can we actually assess this diversity and work towards improving and creating bridges among them? And also more participatory research to encourage the practice, and also faith-led, including and see how we can engage this sort of this approach, this participatory approach into our strategy. This also relates to focus on dissemination of practice-based knowledge, and we spoke about a lot about dissemination. And on this note, I jump to the second question, which how can the hub best support our work? And we spoke about many options, maybe creating those spaces, online seminars, considering the situation, but online workshops, online seminars, where we can actually help each other to deal with the data, the evidence that we have, maybe opening up to invite other people to maybe peer review this work, give insights, help out on how to actually promote and disseminate the work in different languages. And by languages, I don't only refer to, I don't know, English or Tswana or Portuguese, but actually visual language or textual language, using a variety of approaches. Creating networks and collaborative partnerships opportunities, so we can engage here with that triangle with, civil society, faith organizations, research and academia, NGOs. So we have here many actors. So maybe try to find a way so we can create these networks. And create spaces that we can engage regularly. Liz mentioned something that I find very important. So if you create some regularity, some let's say periodical meetings or periodical experiences or practices, it can be contingent. All this knowledge is contingent, right? We can create something on top of it each time. And then jumping to the third question, how can the hub include more diverse voices and faith in our work? Again, there is the idea of mentoring, which was very strong in our group, and I find particularly important. We have many, let's say, strong skills, some of us in one aspect, some other in other aspects. So maybe we can just help each other with this mentoring, but not only ourselves, but also people who would like to invite for maybe sessions or workshops, or to work together. Maybe people that we meet throughout our workshops with the organizations, people that we meet in faith communities that are interested in working in research and activism, and at the same time in academia. So
Raphael, could I just ask you to just do some high level ones, because we are now running into Prabhu's meeting presentation time and we still got group 3 to report back, but you've done a brilliant job. Is there one or two last points you want to make?
No, basically, I think that's all. If there's anyone.
Any from group 2 that want to add? Raphael, thank you so much. You did a brilliant job, and we were very chatty, so thanks for doing that. For group 3, can we ask you to feedback? What I will do, just to make sure we keep to time as much as possible, we'll just limit the break to standing up and having a stretch. So who's going to report back on from group 3? And if we could just do high level report back, Sandra.
Yeah,
Sorry,
I will be very high
short.
level. Don't worry, I always speak little, so it will be top level. Hi everyone. So our group, obviously, feel free to fit in. If I miss anything important, I will read those that I don't remember. So first of all, we wanted to ensure that the next research priorities will be geographically diverse. They will be contextualized to different settings. From religious and faith-based approaches and different regions. So not only on Christian and Muslim, but going to other faiths. There were voices saying that more research must be done with regards to survivors. So embracing the survivor-centered approach, even in research, to ensure that we understand the survivors' experiences, the backgrounds of perpetrators as well, what services are most needed, and I guess also how faith providers fit into this. And mental health of survivors was mentioned by one of our colleagues as a priority. in India. Sharing resources on best practices on how to incorporate faith in interventions in domestic violence, in research on domestic violence. That was a suggestion. So yeah, sharing case studies and these things that work. I know we've been already doing it, so maybe we also should share what doesn't work and what we think should work better. And then my suggestion was to engage with the SGBV standards and review how the international guidelines account for religion, to critically review it and suggest ways how it could be better integrated in the international protection, GBV standards and guidelines. As at present, they are quite marginalized, unfortunately, putting survivors at increased risks and not mitigating negative effects of religious influences. In terms of the research question 2, or the discussion question 2, we would like to see new spaces, less informal spaces. We are tired of webinars in 2020, and we would like to see some new creative ways of bringing people together. Well, Zoom calls were also mentioned, like we are divided in this group, but you can see it on the sticky note, on these notes. I would like, well, my suggestion was to add some to bring people from different disciplines to ensure that the exchange is interdisciplinary, not only people who are already involved in these topics, but people who might be opposite and they might be critical, so they can bring in their perspective to these discussions. And number 3, how can the hub can include more diverse voices? Yes, we should aim for decolonizing research by representation of different groups, obviously in the hub, using other languages than English as well. I think group 2 mentioned that already. There were ideas about opportunities for seed funding to stimulate collaborations between different actors, interdisciplinary, and we should invite mainstream NGOs and donor agencies to engage with us, those who are passionate and those who are critical, and perhaps, yeah, would like to, well, in whatever way, discuss this topic without any agendas, to allow this open debate to make sure this hub can move forward, bringing all different people in the journey. Thank you.
Sandra, thank you so much. It was detailed, but to the point, and really, really appreciated the wonderful feedback. I think the in-groups have not given us a 12-month agenda, but like a 24-year agenda. But I think that's amazing. And I think we're committed to taking on board the ideas, the thinking, and bringing you on this journey with us. So thank you for that. I'm not going to give us a break because we only have 25 minutes left. I can't see my clock right now. But what I would like us to do, Prabhu, if you would just bear with me for one more minute, can we just all stand up if we can stand? If we can't stand, sit in our chairs and just reach up and have a bit of a stretch, stamp our feet, have a wiggle. And then I think we can all now just, you know, because we sit all the time in these Zoom meetings. So stretch, arms, do what Lisa's doing. And so now, Lisa, I'm going to hand to you to hand over to Prabhu. Is that correct? Awesome.
Yes, thank you so much. So the much awaited Prabhu is now going to speak to us. It's going to speak for about 10-12 minutes. Then we're going to have a Q&A session. Feel free to type your questions in the chat box. I'll keep monitoring it, and then I can ask it of Prabhu, but also we're a small group, so you can also just ask your questions after he's done. So please allow me to introduce Prabhu. If the cyclone doesn't interrupt us, he's going to be speaking to us about the Transforming Masculinities programming. He's the head of TFUN's Global Thematic Support Team and is based in Colombo in Sri Lanka. And he's the architect of Transforming Masculinities, TFUN's evidence-based intervention, a faith-based approach on gender equality and positive masculinities. And it's being implemented in 12 countries, including adaptations for focusing on family planning. Thank you, Prabhu. We're really looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
Thanks, Lisa, and thank you everyone for being here. I mean, just a caveat to say, I mean, I recognize that when I say transform masculinities, there are two distinct pieces of work that that we've done and has contributed significantly for the evidence. And there is this, the transfer masculinities intervention funded through What Works in the UK that showed significant reduction or evidence in terms of intimate partner violence, etc. This is not that. This is the family planning adaptation, just because I think we've shared so much on that and it has been circulated. I also want to kind of share findings from a different study showing slightly mixed results as well. And I think this is about the honest interrogation of faith-based approaches and what they mean, etc. So this is, as you can see, it's a randomized controlled trial funded by USAID, a 5-year program, done in consortium with Institute for Reproductive Health, Johns Hopkins University, Tier Fund, the implementer for this particular intervention, Save the Children, FHI 360, and I'm sure there are other partners that I'm forgetting as well. So it's called Passages Project, and this is year 5. We are in year 5, and it's really focused on family planning uptake, and we are the only intervention that focuses on gender or intimate partner violence, and a only faith-based intervention within this consortium as well. It is focused on adolescent life stages, so it's really focusing on first-time parents or newly married couples as well. And this is the transforming masculinities adaptation from the Eastern DRC, which was funded by What Works, a program which is solely focused on gender-based violence prevention. So this includes gender-based violence prevention and family planning, and trialed among 17 Protestant churches in Kinshasa, which is a peri-urban setting. And I will come to the reflections around that towards the end. Next slide, please. I'm sure you know what norm shifting interventions are. Really around, this project is around, like I said, uptake in family planning decisions, etc. But also we've included some norms around household decision-making, non-violent conflict resolution, contraceptive decision-making, really interested in the decisions and how they're made as opposed to just the outcome of the decisions as well. And I think in family planning programming, I think there have been some male engagement programs that, there have been positive outcomes of around family planning methods uptake, but really no focus on understanding how those outcomes or decisions are being made. And again, it could be made reinforcing some patriarchal norms and gender norms that male authority. So we really also want to unpack that this is not just about the positive outcome around family planning uptake, but also how decisions are made and they're equitable, etc. I will be sharing materials related to the project in the best interest of time. So just really would like to go into kind of the findings itself. Next slide, please. Again, so these are the references that we're working in terms of it's a norm shifting intervention. So the entire consortium is really around understanding social norms shifting and at scale. So I think those are 2 questions like that we were trying to explore with the transforming masculinities intervention. This adaptation is called Masculinity Family of War, of Masculinities, Family and Faith, and really exploring, is this faith-based intervention effective in terms of shifting harmful gender norms and gender-based violence practices, but also in terms of promoting or increasing uptake of family planning methods, but also can it happen at scale? So the second phase was really looking at, can it be taken to scale? So the consortium was really exploring around social norms, so very much focused on social norms and the role of religious leaders as reference groups in this, but also really, can this be taken to scale? Next slide, please. Again, as I said, these are the partners for this particular intervention. It was implemented through a Protestant network in the DRC. As I said, it's in Kinshasa, but this network is a network of 24 million Christian Protestants in the DRC, and with about 320,000 parishes. So the idea is around scalability, right? So thinking about, can this be scaled within such a youth organization? And the idea is not only about, can we shift harmful norms around family planning and intimate partner violence, but also can it be taken to scale as well. Next slide, please. These are the key elements of the intervention. So transforming masculinities, for those who are not familiar, it's a gender transformative intervention in the sense of working with men and women both, and boys and girls both. It's not necessarily only focusing on men, as the name suggests, transforming masculinities. We recognize that harmful social norms and gender masculine traits and is necessary to engage with men and boys, but also to engage with men and girls as well. And also really focusing on gender equality, using GBV or gender-based violence as an entry point, but really acknowledging that at the roots of gender-based violence, it's gender inequality, unequal distribution of resources and power, etc. And unless we address that, unless we get to the question of power, we can't have gender transformative interventions or responses. I think it's really focusing around that. We work with both religious leaders and community. So again, coming back to the point somebody made, this is not only a religious leaders instrumentalization intervention where we give them toolkits and say nice things. Is really around their own journey of transformation as well, acknowledging they are men and women in the same space and societies, therefore, shaped by and influenced by the same norms that we are trying to kind of address. So really about their own journey, but also gender champions who are from these congregations, lay leaders, both men and women, who facilitate dialogues with, in this context, newly married couples or first-time parents for 6 to 8 weeks. This intervention is an adaptation, so therefore 8 weeks. We also had a service environment. So because it's a randomized control trial, we had PSI at that time, or Population Services International, or ASF, the local arm, did service a provision. They would also do health talks at the end of the intervention in both control and experimental sites, just to kind of ensure that the service environment was consistent and, as you can see, youth-friendly training, referral cards, etc., to track uptake as well, not necessarily around the efficacy around decision making around this, but also is it translating to behavioral outcomes and can be tracked through the service data, etc. Next slide, please. So I'm going to be sharing with you the evaluation from the couple survey, and these are the kind of different design for the study. So you have the diffusion survey. Because of social norms, we understand there needs to be diffusion of and we wanted that was the most challenging part to kind of actually capture in terms of in our study, how we understood how it diffuses, but really around the impact of diffusion, etc. There were some qualitative studies where there were some ethnographic studies and a costing primer as well as around the interventions. But I will be sharing with you from the couples survey at Endline. Next slide, please. Interestingly, across I will be sharing, this, I know this, around this hub is around gender-based violence, but this is, this intervention is family planning and gender-based violence. So I will be sharing around these two domains. And I think interestingly, what we saw shifts in reference groups for family planning among first-time parents, FTPs, right? So faith leaders, were a significant reference group for family planning decisions at the beginning of the interventions, when we did the normative, we did a social norms exploratory or diagnosis process, but we saw that shifting, by the end of the intervention to becoming less important in that sense. And this is something that we are trying to understand. I think there's a bigger implication for us and partners and husbands, partners and, yeah.
Sorry, it's Lisa. I'm gonna, if you can wrap up in 2 minutes so that we just still have a little bit of time for Q&A. Sorry, I'm just watching the clock.
Sure, thank you. I guess the key takeaway from this is that we are seeing the shift of reference groups for certain behaviors. And I think, we are seeing religious leaders being an important reference group to partners actually becoming an important, reference group as well. So I guess to understand that, we might need to think about, is it an outcome of the interventions where there is more dialogue happening between men and women, the couples actually, in terms of decision making around family planning that is owned by them, and the wider religious space or congregations becoming as a given that they understand this is acceptable. So no, not necessarily an important reference groups going forward. And next slide. Increase, so our outcomes around the voluntary use of modern contraception were really, positive around between baseline and end line for both the groups. Next slide, please. Again, next slide. We are also seeing the same shift in terms of reference groups for intimate partner violence, reducing from religious leaders. As you can see, it went from being the top. So family planning, faith leaders were the second reference group, preferred reference group, or second most important. For intimate partners violence, they were the first reference group for specifically men, but we were seeing at end line was really going down as well. So this is something that we are exploring, and what that means, whether it is actually there's a given, so therefore people don't really think it's necessarily important, or is it an outcome of the interventions where there's more couple communication, etc. Next slide, please. This is our, end-line figures between the comparison interventions. What you don't see is the, baseline figures because there were some anomalies in that. So this is the bit that we are not properly properly unpacked yet. There's a qualitative study that is coming up as well. So just to kind of wrap up here, we didn't see the same level of results as we saw in the rural DRC intervention, which is very solely focusing on gender-based violence, and we are trying to understand this through a qualitative study as well. But I guess we are also doing a comparative study between the two interventions, the same interventions in the two contexts. But I think this is something for us to unpack and understand that not all the faith-based approaches are relevant or work as it is in all contexts. So something for us to think about. I will be sharing the presentation with you all, and obviously this report is available. So thank you very much. Yeah, sorry to rush through.
Prabhu. Oh, Prabhu, thank you so much. And yay, that was so interesting. I want to invite all of you. We're only going to have time for 1 or 2 questions. So Prabhu, if you can also put your email address maybe in the chat box. I'm volunteering you that you can email Prabhu if you have any questions that you don't have time to ask. But opening up, just unmute yourself. We're few enough now that I don't think I need to facilitate. Any questions to Prabhu after this presentation? Angelica, I see your hand.
I will give a space to other people, and then I can go if there are other questions first from other people.
You go. No, go. It's fine. Please.
Okay, quick. I was wondering, because you put a lot of thanks, by the way, for very interesting information. You put a lot of emphasis on the family planning issue too, and I was wondering about the issue of abortion. And how did it work out in the DRC? I forgot about the legislation about abortion, but the whole issue, we know the gag rule from USAID funding projects, and how kind of the ethical implications of not passing information around the whole spectrum of SRHR in this type of interventions.
Yeah, thanks, Angelica. I mean, it is very restricted context as well. So I think the work for us is, it is illegal in DRC. So it was focusing on more in terms of family planning, birth spacing. So that outcome was around family planning and birth spacing. So it is not, we didn't go into the right space in talking about, abortion, but it was more framed around family planning. I think there were limitations, not only from Tier Fund side, but also Georgetown University, IRH is part of the Georgetown University, USAID. I guess the kind of the wider conversation around this is around the decisions really being owned by both the couple members. And I think what we are trying to see is that there's less prominence given to religious leaders and what they thought about family planning in that sense, to more in terms of the couple. So I guess that's an encouraging shift. I don't know the implications of all of that, but definitely we didn't get into kind of the space around abortion, and because of all the limitations, but also like in terms of where we wanted to focus on. And I think the contribution that we could make was around this space. Then Amjad, can I respond to Amjad's question from the chat? Is that okay? Amjad,
yes, sorry, there was a delay on my side. Please do.
Amjad, I think we would reconceptualize social norms. I think in terms of actually adaptation, we didn't do a direct replication. We didn't take the copy paste from Eastern DRC to a peri-urban setting. We went through an adaptation process. We did the social norms diagnosis. But I think conceptualizing, we would do it differently because, Kinshasa is so vast. So people come into a congregation 50 kilometers on a Sunday, and the community dialogues happen in that space, but they go back to home. So where do those spaces, they kind of go transition between a community of sense where this conversation happens, but they go into a space where the community is different and have not been exposed to this space. Whereas in the rural area in DRC where they lived, and the community dialogues happened where they lived, and the congregations and the mosques were in that space. So I guess thinking about that dynamic and what that could look like for specifically a social norm shifting intervention. So I guess thinking about that, I would, would be something that I would pay more attention to in this.
Thank you, Prabhu. I think that's such a good point being raised, the dynamics being so different in a rural versus an urban setting, but everything's just seen as religious community. So thank you for that. We have time for one more question. You can, if you're videoing, you can wave, or Kirsten, you have a question.
Yeah, that was a great presentation, Prabhu, and a quick one though also. And I was just really interested in the slide where it showed the shift in the reference groups. And I wondered what your thoughts were about in the shift, particularly in the decrease in the faith leader and the increase on the health side. And whether you thought that had to do with the fact that the PSI interventions were joined to the religious interventions, and how that might have been different if in other words, a lot of the faith engagement doesn't always have a public health intervention immediately attached to it. So I just wanted to, if you could speak to kind of how those were conjoined and how you thought that might have influenced the results.
Yeah, thanks. I think it definitely would have influenced the results. The health talks are not part of the intervention itself. They were the kind of the consistent service provision across the both control and experimental sites. But what we did was we dovetailed the health talk as part of, towards the end of the 8th week of community dialogues. So I could see, and also like to start with, our baseline was really high for family planning usage, use of modern contraceptive in Kinshasa. So I think thinking about where there's already an existing space, there's a wide acceptance. Our youth organization, ECC has health clinics, family planning, clinics as well, and they work on HIV and AIDS prevention. So I guess our baseline was really higher to start with. But I think what it did was, I think we brought in a bridge between the health workers. Most of the health talks happened in the congregation itself, where pastors would invite them to come and do these health talks at the end of the 8th week of community dialogue sessions. I've developed a complementary module called Family Planning Reflection. So, the Transforming Masculinist standard module is 6 weeks dialogue, and we have 2 more weeks that really explore the question of family planning, birth spacing, joint parenting, male involvement in pregnancies, and etc. And also the creating space for addressing misconceptions around family planning, and for segue into the health talk, 20 minutes health talk. It's only a 20-minute health talk, and then they give a voucher where people go for accessing services. So I think there's a combination of factors, but I think definitely that space where they feel like the faith leaders open to these people coming and talking about family planning in the church or congregation, it really has increased, I think has led to the increase of shift of reference groups for family planning.
Thank you.
Thanks, Prabhu. I'm going to wrap up. Please use the opportunity to email Prabhu to ask him more questions. But thank you so much, Prabhu. And I'm going to hand over to Kirsten, who's going to close our session.
Right. So the most important part of this meeting was listening to all of you. And thank you for the presentations from Lisa and Prabhu and your inputs in the small group discussions. It was really a wide-ranging set of inputs, everything from really looking at the protection clauses in the protection, GBV and protection policies, to language, to local research, to, and particularly the whole, I think a couple groups mentioned the idea of making a real space for providing opportunities for opposing voices. And I think that as part of the shared learning platform, that's something that we'll want to pay really close attention to. I just, our next steps going forward will be to form the Leadership Council, to take the input that you've provided today, share that with the Leadership Council, come up with some initial approaches and strategies. Again, with the emphasis that we are looking initially, the focus is on LMICs. I noted Harriet's question, which local, when GBV is a global issue, obviously, so local is everywhere. But in terms of our decolonization emphasis from both organizations, we want to prioritize some of the lower income ability to access research funds and so on and so forth. So I would encourage you all to invite colleagues to join the hub. I would encourage you to share your suggestions or nominate yourself for the Leadership Council. I think we have some clear directions highlighted from what you've shared with us on your Jamboards. I am not sure, will we be sending up a synopsis of this? I guess this is a question to Lizel and Morma, to the participants today. Will we be sending out a little bit of a write-up of this? Yes, or no, that was a sneeze. Yes. Okay. So yes, we will. So at that, just to close on the dot, I want to thank you for your participation and your input, and we look forward to seeing you again. And we've had an excellent group here. And again, thanks to Morma and Liesel for their work organizing this, and we look forward to seeing you again.
So thank you all. And it's been wonderful. I mean, if we can just hang on for 2 more minutes, maybe you could just turn your camera on and we can take a picture or do it and just evaluate the, as we're researchers, we like to evaluate everything. And so we do this very objective thing at the end of our workshops. So all we do, if you could just put your video on for 1 minute and we just say from a fist to like, oh, not so great, to 5, it was a great experience. And then Liesel will take a screenshot. And so you kind of have to put up a 5 because it makes us look really bad. That's where the objectivity comes in. So from a fist to 5, tell us what your experiences of the workshop was. Yay. Namusa, you probably can't put your video on, but we're going to put a 5 up for you anyway. Thank you. Thank you all. Thanks, everybody. What a wonderful event. I'm looking forward to working with all of you. Take care. Thanks, Kirsten.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Stacey.
Bye,
Bye,
everyone.
yo. Thanks, Lisa. Thanks, Prabhu.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.